Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Amanda Shi. I'm an anesthesiologist and intensivist, and today I wanted to talk about ways that being an anesthesiologist is both mentally and physically exhausting. So today I'll just give you a heads up. It's a different shooting location, and you can hear it in my voice. I definitely have some sort of cold, bronchitis, something along those lines, but I had come to work a little too early, so I figured that I would just record this, and yeah, so here we are. One of the things that actually is quite exhausting is hearing someone's pager. So that battery sound was actually just my pager being low battery. So let's just start with that. So I wanted to share about an experience I had pretty recently. So a few weeks ago, I had an assignment in the operating room, and this is after I was already working in the ICU on nights. So this is a bit of a unique situation in that not every anesthesiologist also works in the ICU, but I had been working and taking my call at night in the ICU over the weekend. And so that was Friday night, Saturday night, I was at work. And then Monday morning, I was again at work in the operating room with 3 really complicated rooms and cases. So that's one of the things that can be really, really challenging about this job, is that number one is that we can have multiple operating rooms that we're supervising. So there's a lot of different models that anesthesiologists will practice. One of the models is to do solo practice, so I can do my own cases and then I'm only in one room and I'm caring for one patient at a time, or in an anesthesia care team model, so that can involve student nurse anesthetists, residents, fellows. It can include anesthesia assistants as well. So in the practice I'm in, we have CRNAs or nurse anesthetists, and in this particular situation, I had 3 nurse anesthetists I was working with, and they were all excellent and we've worked together in the past, but the challenge that comes up in the academic setting is that the patients that I'm seeing are really, really complex and really, really ill. So this is really one of the things that made my day really challenging, besides the fact that I had 3 operating rooms. Now, it's not common for us to have 3 operating rooms during the day, so this was something of an odd staffing that day, and it was because we had a big anesthesia conference, so there weren't as many people around, and that's fine. It doesn't happen very frequently, but it was a particular day where I had a very challenging case in one room that required a lot of energy, a lot of preparation, a lot of coordination ahead of that case, and actually I had to coordinate and help with that patient after the case as well, because they had gone to an ICU. Another case that I had, which actually wasn't that complex, but it required a lot of work on the onset in terms of getting additional lines, like an arterial line. And then a final case that ended up being that it was an unexpected challenge where complications had occurred, which can happen with any kind of surgery. And as a result, I had to run around to 3 different operating rooms on this floor and be able to manage all of that alongside the individuals I was working with in the operating rooms. So I would say that that particular instance was both extraordinarily physically exhausting as well as mentally exhausting, because I had been at work all weekend already thinking about my 25 ICU patients, on top of the fact that I was preparing for the cases that I was caring for on that Monday. So there was definitely a cognitive load there. The physical load was that I definitely was not 100% in my body on that Monday morning, especially having been in the hospital for 30 plus hours over the weekend already. And then finally, the other piece is the physical piece. So one thing that people don't think about is that I'm actually, because I had multiple operating rooms on this floor and they were somewhat separated, that I was just going in and out of all of them constantly. So every time we had something that needed to happen, I was going into one and then I'd get called to another one, and I would walk over there and take care of that. One of the good things about the staffing model, though, is that I can at least get some help from other individuals, and that's one of the things I actually really love about the practice of anesthesia, is the fact that we have so many really great people that want to practice in a team setting and will work together and come help you whenever. So definitely the first part is being an anesthesiologist when you're assigned multiple operating rooms, especially in an academic setting, can be both really, really exhausting mentally as well as physically. The other thing that I wanted to go over, so the second thing I wanted to go over was call. So I used to take operating room call, like anesthesia call, but because I did a fellowship in ICU, I actually take my call in the ICU. That being said, regardless, most practices, if you're an anesthesiologist, there has to be some sort of call that's covered in general. There are some practices, if you're doing ambulatory-based settings only, that typically they don't have any emergency cases at night or weekends. They're not open on nights and weekends, so you don't necessarily have call for that. But if you work in the majority of anesthesia groups, there is some sort of call, because if you're covering a hospital, there can be a chance of surgery, emergency surgery, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It doesn't matter if it's a holiday or a night or a weekend. As a result, there's call that's required. Call can look like a lot of different things. So in my instance, my call is a 14-hour shift overnight in-house in the hospital, whereas some calls are home call, where you have a pager and you respond to that, or you are in-house, but only, especially in the anesthesia world, you are only really up doing things if there's cases going on. There's some hospitals where there's really not a lot of cases going on, whereas the hospital I'm at, I'd say that maybe more than 50% of the time, there's at least one operating room case going overnight. And if you included all the areas in the hospital, I would say that it's almost 100% of the time there's some sort of case happening overnight. So there's a lot of emergencies that can happen, and the hospital needs coverage for that. Call is another really exhausting, both mentally and physically, component of the job of being an anesthesiologist, because it is an overnight shift where you're typically not in your own bed. I'm just gonna speak for the practice that I'm currently in, where you have to physically be here, because if there's an emergency, someone has to be able to respond to that immediately. There's that component of it, in addition to the fact that not only are you off of your sleep cycle, because it's in the middle of the night that you're taking care of patients, you're also mentally exhausted, because most people are actually doing stuff the entire day. In some situations, you're doing a 24-hour call. I don't think that's as common anymore, where you're working the entire day and you go through the night. Most people will come in later in the afternoon or the evening to be able to cover the overnight call, but it is still something that most professions outside of medicine never have to worry about. This idea of having to sleep physically in a hospital, or spend your physical entire night in a hospital working, is something that is just not typical in a lot of other professions. So that's definitely something that's exhausting. And the other piece of it is oftentimes call includes things like weekends. So weekends, holidays, nights, those are all things that we have to cover. And as a result, that can be really, really exhausting, both mentally and physically. The third thing I wanted to cover was the unpredictability of the job. So while anesthesia typically is considered to be more of a shift work type of profession or specialty, because we have the ability to hand off, depending on the practice, there are situations where there may be a lot of extra operating rooms running that you don't anticipate, because it's really hard to be able to anticipate how long certain surgeries can be, and there's always complications that could occur that change the time frame that normally something would take. In general, my practice is quite good about getting us out at a specific time, but at the same time, because of some of the patients that I take care of, if the patients are really complex or the case is really complex, then generally I would say that I don't tend to accept the handoff, and I would stay with the case or the patient until the case is done. So there is certainly a piece of unpredictability to it, and anytime you have something that's not in your control, it is 100% exhausting. It makes it so that you can't really make plans in the evening, because you have no idea when you're gonna leave. And depending on how the day goes, you might just literally have no physical energy to be able to go places, because you have to come back the next day most of the time. That unpredictability is really challenging sometimes. The other piece that's unpredictable is, even though you may have an assignment that seems pretty reasonable, like if I was having 2 operating rooms with pretty straightforward cases, you never know on the day of your work whether something emergent is going to come in, or if there's going to be some changes because some people had called out sick, or there were some unexpected absences along the way. So there's a lot of things that can change within our specialty. That's one of the reasons why when my patients ask me, can I talk to the anesthesiologist that will care for me, I typically have to say that even if we tried to assign you someone ahead of time, there are things that can change in the operating room that would make it that the anesthesiologist that we had previously assigned may not actually be the person that will really be caring for you on the day of the procedure or during the procedure. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that can make it very, very unpredictable in our job. And I would say that that's something too that really ends up weighing on you, not being able to do these things, and it can end up being kind of exhausting. Okay, so that was my very ill-sounding overview of some of the ways that being an anesthesiologist is both mentally and physically exhausting. I'm interested to hear if you have any questions based on some of these things that I talked about in the video. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you want to hear more from me in the future, please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys next time.